Они охраняют нас. Они защищают нас. Они помогают нам во время нужды. Но их разрушают изнутри. День за днем. День за днем. День за днем. Это работает незримый враг. И он прячется на самом виду. Самый опасный враг — это тот, кого совсем не подозреваешь. «18 июня 1940 года. Психиатр и бригадный генерал Джон Рис выступил на ежегодной встрече Национального совета психической гигиены со стратегическим планом для психиатрии.
We must aim to make it permeate every educational activity in our national life. Public life, politics, and industry should all of them be within our sphere of influence.
Но для достижения цели психиатрии был нужен идеальный испытательный полигон. Там, где неограниченный бюджет непрерывно растет. Полигон с нескончаемым запасом людских ресурсов.
More people than any other organization in America.
These troops are the guinea pigs.
They're being experimented on.
Полигон, где каждый приказ выполняется без вопросов.
You have to obey those orders.
You don't have an option.
I'm legally obligated.
Испытательный полигон, где любые сопутствующие потери пойдут под грифом «секретно».
This story has been censored every step of the way.
Бригадный генерал Рис знал, где искать.
The Army and the other fighting services form rather unique experimental groups, since they are complete communities. And it is possible to arrange experiments in a way that would be very difficult in civilian life.
Это была хитрая тактика, особенно когда подавалась под видом помощи.
And now the soldier was sick, and unless we do something for him, he may remain sick for an indefinite period of time. Gentlemen, you are not requested to treat these patients, you are directed to do so.
Психиатрия прошла долгий путь. Всего 20 лет назад в жизни военных о ней почти и не слышали.
It wasn't until World War I that they came out of the asylums and sort of worked their way into the military. And it was a very slow, very gradual insertion.
Медленно и постепенно, потому что к психиатрии просто не было доверия. И на то была веская причина. Ее методы лечения никогда не были научными. На деле многие ее экспериментальные процедуры позже назовут пыткой.
One of the first uses of psychiatric treatment actually goes back to World War I when it was used on German soldiers who were deserting and trying to leave the front because of the horrors of the trench warfare on the Western Front.
Это лечение называли терапией Кауфмана по имени изобретателя, но немногие считали его полезным. Через измученного солдата пропускали ток, усиливая его, пока тот больше не мог терпеть. В это время психиатр делал ему гипнотическое внушение.
Diese Kaufmann-Therapie wurde von den Psychiatern als Heiltherapie angewandt und eingeführt. Für die Soldaten war das alles andere als Heilung, weil es ja ein Schmerz war, der ihnen zugefügt wurde an den Gliedmaßen. Und so war wohl der wahre Grund, warum die Soldaten dann wieder an die Front gingen, nämlich, dass sie diese Schmerzen nicht mehr aushalten konnten und lieber sich in Kampfeinsatz wagten, als in der Klinik dauernd Schmerzen zu ertragen.
Но мучения солдат от боли не помешали психиатрии продолжать свои эксперименты во время Второй мировой войны. И как прежде, они не были предназначены, чтобы помочь пациентам преодолеть травмы войны.
Zum einen war man von Seiten der Wehrmedizin im Zweiten Weltkrieg bestrebt, den Patienten noch schneller, als dies im Ersten Weltkrieg gelungen war, wieder an die Front zurückzuschicken. Das war der erste und sozusagen das entscheidende Ziel, das die Kriegspsychiatrie im Zweiten Weltkrieg hatte.
Во всем мире психиатрия использовала войну как возможность опробовать очень рискованные методы лечения на солдатах, не имевших права голоса. Одним делали электрошок, других погружали в глубокую кому, а третьим давали мощные психотропные препараты. Она проникала все дальше и дальше, вмешиваясь в рекрутирование, обучение, дисциплину, мораль. Психиатры даже высказывали мнение о назначении офицеров.
Poole is an odd sort of man. In civilian life he was very badly adjusted. In the personal sense, that is, he just couldn't mix, couldn't make friends.
К 1943 году психиатрия так глубоко внедрилась в вооруженные силы Америки, что главный психиатр ВМФ хвастался.
Psychiatry now has a place in every step of the Navy man's career, from his induction to his eventual separation from the service.
It is because of the military that psychiatrists, they became important. You know, they're wearing a uniform now, and they've got the epaulets, and, you know, they've got some power because of the military. The military gave them that.
Главный военный психиатр Соединённых Штатов, бригадный генерал Уильям Меннингер, написал руководство по психическим проблемам, которые, как он считал, могут быть у солдат. Но анализов крови не было, рентгена не было, под микроскопом ничего не было найдено. Только мнение. Научные доказательства никак нет. Но зато это выручило психиатрию. Ведь армейское руководство Меннингера придало всему законный вид. Пользуясь им, можно было ставить диагнозы и лечить еще больше военнослужащих. Армейское руководство было так популярно, что на его основе была создана Библия психиатрии. Руководство по диагностике и статистике психических расстройств – ДСМ. Из-за влияния людей, подобных Меннингеру, к середине Второй мировой войны военные по всему миру купились на заявление психиатрии о том, что психиатры – это эксперты душевного здоровья. Поэтому им было позволено испытывать препараты на все большем количестве солдат.
Are the barbiturates. You will note that in combat exhaustion, massive doses of these drugs are needed in therapy.
During the Second World War, both Americans and Germans experimented with stimulants. Because everybody thought, well, this is great, you know, it helps you focus, it keeps you awake.
Одним из таких наркотиков был первитин. Его давали немецким солдатам, чтобы снизить торможение и повысить агрессивность.
Man kann sagen, dass dieser Feldzug durchaus Pervitin getränkt war, was die Wehrmachtssoldaten betrifft. Die Wehrmachtssoldaten waren für ihre Gegner unfassbar fit, sie waren unfassbar wach, sie hielten sehr, sehr lange durch, sie waren furchtlos, sie waren aggressiv und wirkten vor allem auf die Gegner wie aufgezogen.
Et il a fallu à peu près 18 mois pour que les accidents apparaissent en nombre considérable, c'est-à-dire des jeunes soldats qui brutalement se conduisaient comme des bêtes féroces, tiraient sur tout ce qui bougeait, sur les civils et sur leurs propres compatriotes. Et les accidents, les imprudences au pilotage d'avions, au pilotage de chars ont été telles que l'armée allemande a interdit l'utilisation de ces drogues à partir du milieu de l'année 42 ou 43. Et l'armée anglaise a vécu la même expérience.
Стимуляторы также использовались японцами. Они мгновенно делали бойца смелым, но дорогой ценой. Солдат на фото был водителем торпеды во Вторую мировую.
海軍の中の特攻隊員ということで、人間魚雷で有名な回転というものの搭乗員として訓練を受け。
Миссия тебя сажают внутрь управляемой торпеды, которую надо взорвать вручную вблизи вражеского корабля.
海軍の中ではね、とにかく先行艇部隊、先行艇による特攻を、とにかく成功させるためにということで、海軍ぐるみでっていうかね、でもってとにかく搭乗員たちにアンフェタミンを投与させて作戦行動を成功させるということがもう行われてたということですね。
И хотя этот человек пережил войну, его жизнь была погублена.
で実際に私の叔父も、帰ってきて、復員してきてからそういった形で今度メタンフェタミンヒロポン中毒になって、で今度ヒロポンが禁止されたわけですよね。今度は何になってか、もうアルコール、もう本当にアルコールはひどかったです。私も叔父が叔母にね本当に暴力を振るうシーンっていうのは何度も見てますし、だから彼自身も実際に、自殺を3度図って。
С 50-х по 70-е годы психиатрия в таких странах, как Великобритания, США и СССР, продолжала использовать армию как полигон для испытания новых экспериментальных методов лечения. Американская военная психиатрия использовала солдат для экспериментов с ЛСД.
The squad, all except the drill sergeant, now drugged with LSD. After a few minutes, the men found it difficult to obey orders.
Даже понимая опасность этого наркотика, британская психиатрия продолжала тесты с ЛСД, теперь на морских десантниках.
Unknown to the troops, the drug was added to the water on the second day. At 11:40, the first effects of the drug make their appearance. The men no longer take cover, they relax and begin to giggle. 70 minutes after the administration of the drug, with one man climbing a tree, the troop commander gives up, saying, "I cannot do anything about this. I cannot control the men and I can take no action myself. I am wiped out as an attacking force."
В советской армии солдатам давали бог знает что.
В советской армии я служил поваром, и обычно перед обедом приходил доктор, врач, и давал нам пакетик, чтобы мы сыпанули в борщ или там в кашу и размешали. Но мы обычно говорили, что это такое. Это нормально, это витамины. Но что это такое, я не знаю. Тем более, что мы, повара, обычно свою долю вынимали из котла до того, как приходил доктор.
Время шло, и солдатам продолжали давать психиатрические препараты с целью неизученной и неодобренной. Это был один гигантский эксперимент.
In the Falklands campaign, air crew were given uppers and downers so that their flight duty rotas could be maximized.
We've gotten reports that the Gulf War II pilots do take amphetamines, they do take dexedrine, and that at the nighttime they're given Ambien to bring them down so they can sleep. So they're continuously on this up and down kind of scenario.
Certainly in the Iraq, Afghanistan wars, psychiatry has played a huge role. Huge.
Психиатрия сейчас – признанная часть армии по всему миру. Нам велят доверять психиатрии. Там, мол, авторитеты. Проблема лишь в том, что дела не стали лучше. Они стали только хуже.
I spent almost 26 years on active duty in the Marine Corps. I retired with the grade of Brigadier General.
I was an Army captain in the aviation branch.
I was a Staff Sergeant E5 in the United States Air Force.
I was in the United States Marine Corps from 2007 to 2011.
Florida Army National Guard.
31st Engineering Battalion.
I was in aviation and military intelligence.
Battlefield intelligence analyst.
I was a U.S. Navy fighter pilot.
Combat medic with an LPN license. So my nomenclature would be a 68 whiskey Mike 6.
I got out as a sergeant, non-commissioned officer, this past March. I didn't see the emergence of psychiatry in the Army up until I suffered my own injury. And then it was like, it was a flood. It was a flood of doctors, and it was a flood of meds.
Солдаты сегодня испытывают тот же стресс, что и солдаты в прошлом. Долгие дни, тяжелые задания, вдали от близких и любимых. И когда наваливаются психологические проблемы, они без сомнения реальны. Но куда бы солдат ни обратился за помощью, сегодня он часто оказывается в руках у психиатрии.
You can go to a chaplain, and a chaplain is just somebody that you can talk to. But I think part of the issue is that a chaplain is kind of obligated to route you straight to a psychiatrist if you mention any key words, you know? Like, yeah, I have been stressed out or something like that.
If you tell a therapist you're depressed, that's what they're going to send you to a psychiatrist. It's going to happen. It's just how it works.
So they'll make a real quick decision on you have a problem or what the problem might be within just minutes. So 10 minutes, maybe 15 minutes, if you're lucky, 45 minutes in the office.
Стандартная практика психиатра – поставить диагноз психического расстройства. Он может сказать, что у вас химический дисбаланс мозга, хотя никаких доказательств у него нет. И не будет, ведь таких анализов не существует. На самом деле анализов нет ни для одной из сотен душевных болезней, перечисленных в руководстве по диагностике и статистике.
Psychiatry, especially, has no objective means of making any diagnosis. In general medicine, at least you have x-rays and blood tests to go on, and so that's the big dilemma faced by psychiatry. They have zero ability to diagnose, so they have zero ability to treat.
No physical abnormality has ever been found. So there is no physical abnormality to demonstrate by an MRI, a CT, an EEG. It's another fraud, pure and simple. It's another fraud.
Так что в психиатрии ставят диагноз болезни мозга, физической анормальности мозга, наличие которой она не может даже доказать.
There were no medical tests of any kind. There were no blood tests. Nothing that I could tell that was scientific in any way or medical in any way.
Somebody suggests that you have a disorder, a disease or something, there should be some sort of objective test. It's not unreasonable to ask for it. It's not unreasonable to insist on it.
Но от психиатра этого не дождешься. Одни мнения. И они не стесняются их высказывать.
There are troops that are seeing psychiatrists who are automatically, before they even open up their mouth, being diagnosed just because of the way how they look.
The psychiatrist told me that I would never amount to anything in the military again because of the emotional trauma I experienced and my current, at the time, my depression levels, my stress, my anxiety. I was never going to accomplish anything in the military. I would never be a good soldier again. And the only viable option that the military saw was to discharge me.
When a psychiatrist says your life is not worth anything because it's been all some sort of psychosis or some sort of trauma event, or you've got this disease or that, or some brain chemical or whatever, a soldier's life turns into nothing.
Каждый год тысячам мужчин и женщин в форме ставится диагноз психической болезни, а иногда 2 или 3. Это настолько вышло из-под контроля, что Пентагон тратит 2 миллиарда в год только на душевное здоровье. И бюджет на психическое здоровье администрации по делам ветеранов раздулся до небес. От менее чем 3 миллиардов в 2007 году до почти 7 миллиардов в 2014. Это большие траты на профессию, которая не может найти доказательств для своих болезней мозга даже под микроскопом. Но это ничуть не смущает психиатрию. Диагноз – это лишь первый шаг, скорее повод, чтобы завлечь вас для какого-нибудь очень опасного лечения.
joined the Navy when I was 17, and I retired. I was medically discharged, I should say, from the SEAL teams. I served my country with America's best in a time of war. And I had the honor of leading them. But I did lose, you know, my swim buddy, which is the guy you go through SEAL training with. And that gave me a survivor's guilt that I can't begin to describe. And, you know, I make it through combat in multiple firefights and nothing. I got blown up by an IED, it broke my neck, you know, and I didn't know it at the time. But I lived with that for like 5 years, make it through all of that. And I come back and they almost kill me with pills.
Практически неизбежный результат психиатрического диагноза – рецепт на психиатрический препарат. Психиатрия не делает почти ничего другого, а рецептов в ней выписывают множество. С 2005 по 2011 годы в Министерстве обороны США количество рецептов на психиатрические препараты выросло почти в 7 раз. Это рост в 30 раз больше, чем у гражданских. Ветеранам тоже навязывают препараты.
We get this guy from the Veterans, I think the Veterans Administration or something like that. And he's basically telling you, if you are depressed, if you do something erratic, it's a disease. I mean, this guy's literally the loudest guy in the entire briefing. You know, very just in your face about it. And he's just basically saying, you know, if you're doing anything other than what you normally do, you have a disease and you need to be put on the system, you need drugs.
We can control it with medication. And then right after that, they're gonna get prescribed whatever drug the psychiatrist seems fit rather than just being able to talk to somebody.
No therapy, no lifestyle change. It's a straight line of how they educate these doctors in pharmacology, a symptom to a drug.
Психиатрия и не представляет, что ее препараты делают с телом. Но когда доходит до их выдачи, это едва ли имеет значение.
My older brother got out of the Marine Corps, like I said, about a year ago. And when he went to the VA hospital to make his disability claim and talk to him, he told him that he had trouble sleeping. And he didn't tell me what they gave him, but he basically said they gave him a big bag of happy pills.
So I came home on R&R from Iraq and got severely depressed. And they went and told me to go see Don-based psychologist, which then they prescribed me meds.
He basically told me what was wrong with me and prescribed me with Zoloft, and that was pretty much it.
I've been on Ambien, Seroquel, Paxil. That was one of the big ones. A very dangerous drug that I just think is very harmful, called Abilify. It kind of puts whatever meds you're on steroids.
Wellbutrin, Zoloft, modafinil, methylphenidate, trazodone, Prazosin, and Ambien.
Starts out with Dexedrine, Vibrid, Dalmane,
Citalopram,
Thorazine,
Citalopram,
Prozac, and effects are at the same time.
Stelazine,
Zoloft,
Compazine,
Seroquel,
Cogentin,
Abilify,
Nodular,
Wellbutrin,
IV-Amytal, Depakote, Artane,
Xanax,
Halperidol or Haldol,
Klonopin,
Temazepam,
Adderall, and Librium.
5 milligrams to 300.
300 milligrams. 1,200 milligrams of lithium a day.
Most individuals who would be given these drugs have no clue what the drug is, really, or what it can do to the mind, really. They just don't know. So it's a blind date. And and sometimes it turns out to be kind of an ugly one.
Военных сажают на препараты без предела, особенно в США. Всего за последние 10 лет правительство США истратило более $4,5 миллиардов лишь на препараты для солдат и ветеранов. В 2011 году Пентагон истратил на таблетки, инъекции и вакцинацию больше, чем на вертолеты «Черный ястреб», танки «Абрамс», самолеты «Геркулес С-130» и ракеты «Патриот» вместе взятые.
The use of both psychiatry and psychotropic drugs has just ballooned in the U.S. military.
Every soldier that I've talked to, every time they've seen a psychiatrist, they would prescribe them some kind of psychotropic drug right off the bat.
I would say 60 to 70% of the soldiers we saw in our center were on medication.
Let me give you an example. I was on a committee, a scholarship committee for veterans at a college, and they invited the VA psychiatrist to come in to give a talk about post-traumatic stress disorder. But at the very end, I raised my hand, I said, how many of your veterans that you see do you medicate? And initially he tried to skirt the answer. He said, I see the most difficult. And I said, we all see the most difficult. How many do you medicate? 98%. It's criminal.
И повсюду в мире с этим не намного лучше.
I deal a lot with a lot of our soldiers within our NATO brothers and sisters. Canada, New Zealand, Australia, UK, Germany, France, Belgium, and even soldiers down in Italy and even in Spain. Each and every one of them have complained about the issues dealing with psychotropic drugs with them.
I was stationed in Germany for a while. I was in Kosovo for a while. And they had talked about that, yeah, when they see the psychiatrist, they do give them psychotropic drugs. So it seems like it's a worldwide problem.
A lot of our veterans have told us that when they went for help whilst they were still serving, they were then prescribed medication. It didn't help.
Quand on envoie un patient chez un psychiatre, il ressort directement avec des molécules chimiques. Et ça, on commence à avoir les effets secondaires et on commence à avoir les problèmes.
І справді, психіатри давали військовослужбовцям небезпечні наркотики, при цьому знаючи, що військовослужбовці мають в руках небезпечну зброю.
Och någonstans så finns det ju någon drivande orsak till att vi skriver ut mer och mer piller. Men vi får ju inte det förväntade resultatet.
Но независимо от страны, это армия. А в армии у солдат нет выбора, кроме как следовать приказам.
When I'm wearing this uniform, if I'm ordered to see a psychiatrist, I have to go to see a psychiatrist. If I'm not in this uniform, I can tell them no.
The suggestion to go see the psychiatrist came across as a heavy recommendation. It wasn't a direct order, but it was, this is something you should go do. It's something that needs to be handled. You should go do this.
А потом на вас давят, чтобы вы принимали препарат.
I actually asked my commander that. I said, do I have to take these drugs if is this an order? And they all just stared at me, wouldn't give me a no or a yes. Implied that I'm supposed to take this. If I would have refused, I probably would have lost my rank or lost opportunities in the military because I wasn't taking care of the property of the military, which was my body.
Most of the troops that I talked with did not want to take the psychiatric drugs, did not want them, did not need them, and rebelled at having to take them. But they were told that if you don't take these drugs, you can't get your compensation and you can't get any more VA treatment if you deny the drug usage. So they did.
I have heard that military personnel have been ordered to take these drugs. My response to that is, that's an illegal order, and I had that verified by a judge advocate general right here in Washington, D.C. It's illegal to demand that. If a psychologist tells you that you have to take it or you're going to lose your benefits, you need to report that psychologist to the proper authorities.
Официально каждый шестой военнослужащий США принимает хотя бы один психиатрический препарат. Но вот в чем дело. Согласно Комитету Вооруженных сил Сената США, никто не знает, сколько препаратов прописывается войскам. В бумагах нет следов, никаких рецептов, их просто выдают. По сути, масштабы психиатрической наркотизации в армии, возможно, гораздо больше. Особенно, когда столь многим подходит самая ценная психиатрическая комбинация диагноза и препаратов.
I was in the Army, and when I got out, I was corporal. And then I went back as a contractor for the Department of the Army. My original purpose was definitely get involved, serve my country, and then pursue it from that point forward. I personally had been deployed to Iraq for just about a year, and having gone back to Europe, I was having trouble sleeping, and having some issues just adjusting back to this, different lifestyle after having been shot at, nearly blown to pieces, so many times, to this, now I can just go down the road and get a pizza. One of my officers recommended I go see a psychiatrist. Yeah, within 10 minutes it was, so you're probably bipolar, most likely ADD, and PTSD.
Упоминание видимых следствий боевого стресса можно найти у древних писателей – Гомера, Геродота. Французы называли это «mal du pays», немцы – «heimweh». В Испании это было «estar roto». Как бы то ни было, столетиями военные признавали, что иногда ужасы войны бывают для солдат непереносимы. Это считалось нервной реакцией, неизбежной составной сражений. Но в психиатрии ее назвали дисфункцией мозга, а с 1980 года – посттравматическим стрессовым расстройством – ПТСР.
This war isn't any different than any other than guys coming back with shell shock, battle fatigue or combat fatigue, and now they're calling it post-traumatic stress disorder. It's been around forever.
И как их другие расстройства, оно не было научно протестировано. За него проголосовали психиатры. И так оно попало в руководство по диагностике и статистике. Буквально голосованием. Сегодня это самый популярный диагноз в военной психиатрии. И он распространяется среди гражданских.
The goal is to combat post-traumatic stress disorder, or PTSD.
Helping veterans with PTSD.
A soldier's post-traumatic stress disorder.
I was diagnosed with PTSD.
PTSD.
How many times do you hear PTSD in the media now? People really don't understand it, I don't think, and we're just trying to assign a label to people, our soldiers and sailors that are coming back from these very horrific events that they're being witness to.
People who suffer from post-traumatic stress are reacting to a traumatic event in a normal fashion. What we believe is that the military is treating veterans in particular with post-traumatic stress as though they have a mental illness. We don't believe they have a mental illness. We believe that they're wounded and what they need is healing.
And PTSD psychiatry has created a disease. They speak of it as a disease just as they speak of generalized anxiety disorder and clinical depression as diseases, but none of them are actual diseases.
If someone shows up in my practice and they say a psychiatrist or other doctors diagnosed me with post-traumatic stress disorder, I would actually ask the patient, okay, what tests were done to establish that diagnosis? And they'll think about it and they'll realize that nothing was done. They just got the opinion of whoever the practitioner was.
Certainly there is stress that goes along with combat. When you put a soldier into an environment where he's not getting sleep, he's being shot at, friends around him are getting hurt or dying, that's going to cause some bad side effects. Sure, those phenomena exist, but that doesn't then equate to, well, let's drug him.
Ужасы боевого стресса далеко не поддельные. Но чтобы психиатрия изобретала медикообразную дисфункцию мозга, убеждая вас принять сомнительное лечение, а затем они расширяют дефиницию дальше и дальше.
What qualifies for PTSD has recently been downgraded, but they have directives that come out that say, well, now we're going to suggest that everybody who's, you know, been in a war zone could possibly, maybe, and so with that, anybody qualifies.
What I saw with the new privates coming in is they were just out of basic training and they were given psych drugs for PTSD, for being in basic training for 9 weeks.
I was diagnosed with PTSD because I came back and I was a little jittery, and it's just, I guess they said that I had PTSD from that, when it was just I was still kind of trying to assimilate back into the scene of not being in combat, of not being over.
The determination that I had PTSD was almost made before I even walked into the office.
They told me that it was clear that I had post-traumatic stress disorder and that I needed medication to fix it.
Nearly every soldier in my company was diagnosed with PTSD. Nearly every soldier.
Существует 175 комбинаций симптомов, которые используют в психиатрии, чтобы поставить диагноз ПТСР. Неудивительно, что 37% ветеранов недавней войны лечатся от него. Получив диагноз, 80% получают психотропные препараты. Из этих ветеранов 89% получают антидепрессанты, а 34% мощные антипсихотики. Даже после того, как один из лучших специалистов по ПТСР признал в своей работе, что антипсихотики не работают.
Just because a medication can be widely prescribed doesn't mean necessarily that it's really helpful for overall for the symptoms of post-traumatic stress disorder.
Если бы в психиатрии озаботились провести анализы, возможно, нашлось бы физическое отклонение. То, что они называют ПТСР, но что может оказаться реальным повреждением, видным при сканировании мозга. Это называется травматическое повреждение мозга. По оценкам, от него пострадали 320 тысяч солдат.
Traumatic brain injury is an injury to the brain itself, either caused by a concussive blast or a closed head wound. There's some difficulty determining between traumatic brain injury and post-traumatic stress because the symptoms tend to mirror each other. Inability to focus, short-term memory loss, difficulty with rage or anger.
You're talking about a physical injury, an actual brain injury, as opposed to a mental health, a condition. You know, it's the two absolutely, totally separate things.
I'm handling a Gulf vet who's got traumatic brain injuries. He's labelled with PTSD, and he's got a lump of shrapnel in his head, you know? So, hang on, you don't get lumps of shrapnel flying into your head and embedding in your skull do not leave you with no effect on the brain. The brain's going to take a real hammering from that sort of thing.
Конечно, большинство в психиатрии не заметит ТПМ, ведь они не проверяют на него. Вместо этого, пока проблема усугубляется, они маскируют ее препаратом, что может только сильно все испортить.
I think my main goal why I joined the military was, the first thing is to get money for college. And then all my friends were going in and they were having a blast with it, and I just really wanted to do something with my life and not just stay here in a small town and not do anything. I served in 2 branches of the military. I served in the Marine Corps and also the Army, and got out as a specialist also at 84. When I was in the Marine Corps, I never went and saw a psychologist, but when I was in the Army, they told me I had to go see one. At that point, he diagnosed me with PTSD and prescribed me Prozac and Wellbutrin in Iraq, still carrying a weapon, still in the combat zone. The psychologist said that my anxiety and depression, everything, like stuff like that, should actually go away. And actually it did not, it got worse.
Жизнь солдата требует многого. Тебя обучают быть бдительным, решительным, сосредоточенным, в лучшей умственной и физической форме. Это необходимость. Но психиатрические препараты могут сделать тебя бесполезным в бою. В психиатрии это знают и все-таки утверждают, что они помогают. А вот что на самом деле.
All psychiatric meds are mind-altering drugs. People don't put that together, but they're mind-altering, and they have side effects, disastrous side effects.
One of the most significant problems about every psychotropic drug that I can think of, the stimulants, the tranquilizers, antipsychotics, mood modulators, are unpredictable. I can give the same drug to 20 different men, and they'll have 10 different reactions to it.
Никто, даже тот, кто прописывает, не знает, чем закончится прием препарата. Они все разные, и у каждого длинный список побочных эффектов, указанных мелким шрифтом на вкладыше.
My friends that take the drugs that I'm prescribed have very bad balance, a terrible memory. They have difficult talking clearly, speaking clearly to each other.
Their reaction times are very slow, and they have a hard time concentrating.
It pretty much just erased all feelings that I had. So I was just there.
A lack of motivation, really. I just stopped caring.
I was constantly demotivated, very worn down all the time. I was constantly sleepy, like not tired, just sleepy. I could stop doing something and instantly fall asleep.
1 minute you can be on patrol, next minute you'd be asleep. That's what those pills do to you. They make you tired.
I would get headaches, but it's not like a normal headache. It would be like sharp pains just zapping through my head.
My anxiety level was through the roof. I had heart problems. I put on 20 to 25 kilos of extra weight.
I probably gained 40 pounds over the course of that period of time.
I was up to almost 300 pounds. I was in metabolic syndrome. My body my adrenal system had completely shut down. My muscles had seemingly turned to water, and I could not lose weight for anything.
I can't ever think of anybody who's ever said, I feel better. This has helped me. I can't honestly think of anybody who's ever said that to me. And I've seen and talked to a lot of veterans in my time.
These are supposed to be the finest, most elite soldiers, you know, physical combat machines, and they're being given something that's harming them, that's destroying not only their body physically, but also their minds mentally.
В психиатрии вам скажут, что польза от препаратов перевешивает риск. Это чушь и неправда с научной точки зрения. Подробные исследования доказали, что препараты типа антидепрессантов работают не лучше, чем фальшивая сахарная таблетка. Но их некоторые побочные эффекты не просто вредны, они смертоносны. Помимо ужасных возможных побочных эффектов от психиатрических препаратов, есть еще и такой странный факт. Они ничего не лечат. Тогда что же они делают? Они меняют ваше поведение, притупляя ваши чувства. Это не только мешает человеку разобраться в происходящем, но и отгораживает его от окружающего. Для этого даже есть название – деперсонализация.
I've had patients who've been given very large doses of psychoactive drugs over a period of about a year and basically destroyed their sense of self.
They don't care almost about anything. You could go up to someone and start yelling at them, and if they're on the large enough cocktail, they won't do anything. They become almost drones.
So they're literally lobotomizing our soldiers with these drugs. I'm sorry. I'm just being very direct and honest with my experience of over 200 injured warriors. It's almost like being in a mental hospital with lobotomized patients. I'm sorry. It's just awful.
И деперсонализация становится просто опасной, когда препараты вызывают другой побочный эффект.
If someone is numbed like that, they're less likely to be concerned about the consequences of their behavior and might resort then to impulsive actions, violent actions.
Some of the effects of the drugs that we're aware of, that the veterans we've dealt with have come across, have been things like more anxiety, more anger.
They're having all these fits of anger, aggression, they're getting in fights with their significant other.
And of course what this has led to is just a really horrendous number of domestic shootings, domestic beatings, child, wife abuse.
Цифры это подтверждают. С 2006 года число преступлений на сексуальной почве и насилия в семьях военных выросло более чем на 30%, а жестокое обращение с детьми на 43%, тогда как применение препаратов побило все рекорды. А еще есть случаи, когда солдат под воздействием психиатрических лекарств сходит с ума.
This one particular morning, the soldier was in our unit, and most of the soldiers in our unit are on some type of medication. And she was waiting for the soldier. And when she walked in, he was locking and loading his weapon. And she asked him, "What are you doing?" And he looked at her, he said, "I don't know." And she said, "You were locking and loading," which means he's putting his ammo in his weapon. And she asked him, and she said, "What were you gonna do?" He said, "I don't know if I was just gonna shoot myself or shoot up everybody in this building, and then myself." And we were there.
11 мая 2009 года. Сержант Джон Рассел открыл огонь в клинике боевого стресса в Багдаде. Он убил 2 офицеров и 3 рядовых. За день до этого психиатр прописал ему антидепрессанты. 11 марта 2012 В глухой деревне в Афганистане штаб-сержант Роберт Бейлс убил 16 человек. 9 из них были дети. До этой вспышки безумия Бейлс нюхал психиатрический препарат Валиум и пил алкоголь. 16 сентября 2013 Ветеран ВМС Аарон Алексис принес ружье на базу ВМС в Вашингтоне, где хладнокровно убил 12 человек. Согласно докладам, Алексису был прописан антидепрессант тразодон.
He talked about it. He said he went to the VA and they would give him some medicine.
Вот лишь немногие из тех, кто побывал в руках психиатров прямо перед тем, как совершить акты ужасающего насилия. Рядовой 1-го класса Дэвид Лоуренс, который под воздействием залофта и тразодона убил в камере командира Талибана. Дэрен Стайлер, бывший морской пехотинец, застреливший 2 коллег, а затем себя в универмаге в Нью-Джерси. У него был диагноз клиническая депрессия, и он принимал Прозак. И еще Эдди Раут, который убил ветерана тюленей ВМС. Он 4 дня как вышел из психбольницы, где его лечили от ПТСР.
Drugs and weapons do not mix. Okay, it's a recipe for disaster all by itself.
They're seeing things different. Their mind has been altered. Their brain has been altered. Their judgment and reasoning is not what it would have been without these medications.
It's the mind that makes the decision of when to shoot and what to shoot. It's the mind. If you alter the mind and you imbalance the mind, which is what psychiatric drugs do, you change the results of who or what gets shot on the battlefield or at home after the battle is over.
Психиатрические препараты склоняют к насилию не только солдат. Они провоцируют самых разных людей на убийство дома, на работе и в школах. И еще есть вопрос о том, что они могут сделать себе.
Ever since I was a little kid, you know, I always loved the military. I loved the Army, and I think I always knew that I wanted to, you know, join. I just said, you know, I wanted to go and experience it, you know, and you know, just to serve my country. And then I went to the recruiter station. You know, I said I want to jump out of airplanes and ride motorcycles. And right then they said, "We got a job for you," you know. But you know, I did it, and it was good. It was right after combat, So, you know, I started getting these dreams and flashbacks and all that stuff, and then, you know, kind of like big anxiety and all that stuff. And I went to my doc, and they said, yeah, we got to get you some meds, you know, and they gave me them, and, you know, that was it. You first start taking it, you feel great. Whoa. And then it just like, it's like you get immune to it, and then, oh, let's take a higher dose. Let's take a higher dose.
In my experience, I didn't see anything helping at all. I felt like it was making everything worse.
I gained like, how many, like 40 pounds taking the meds. We looked it up, and that one med, I don't remember what it was called, but it said it acted like you had like 1,500 calories every pill you took, and I had to take it 3 times a day.
If he missed a dose, then the whole family would know, the whole house would be kind of on edge because you couldn't talk to him. He would snap.
You take your meds and you can just start feeling it going down, and then you're just like, bam, and you're a zombie, you know?
It almost seemed like he just didn't care about life anymore. He wasn't himself.
My body was breaking down, and my wife, she's all into herbs, and she's saying this isn't right. And then I was all fucking drunk, and you know, the meds, just taking that shit, and I just said, fuck it, I'm done. And I took my pistol and fucking put it in my mouth, and she opened up the door. I fucking took him, and I said, I was like, fucking, I said, we gotta fucking do something, you know? And this shit just didn't work, you know? And
I had to literally grab the weapon away from him because it probably would have happened.
So I said, fuck it, I'm stopping. You know, I'm stopping taking all this shit. It's killing me. You know, it's gonna kill me. It's gonna kill my wife. You know.
That was the straw that broke the camel's back. It wasn't working, and something had to be done. I didn't want to lose my husband. I didn't want him to kill himself, and I didn't want to be killed as well in the process.
I knew I wasn't me. You know, it was the drug that was doing it, and I knew I had to change or I'd be dead, and that's why I changed it.
Самоубийство – огромная проблема в армии. С 2002 года их число в США почти удвоилось.
The suicide rate has really been going out the roof here lately with our military members, both while they're still in and once they return back to the States.
I would move from base to base to base, and I'd be on different missions at different times. And one minute I'm on a base and I'm having lunch, and I'm being asked, hey, did you hear about those 3 guys, those 3 soldiers who committed suicide?
It was a black eye on Fort Bliss. Soldiers were dying left and right. Preventable deaths, we're talking suicides, we're talking about these soldiers getting in their cars going, or motorcycles going 150 miles an hour and, you know, hitting a median, family violence. It really spiraled out of control.
При всем при этом в психиатрии продолжают без разбора раздавать препараты, которые вызывают насилие и суицидальные мысли.
My psychiatrist at the time had issued me a recommended gabapentin, and I took one, and I think within 30 minutes I had thoughts of suicide.
They started me on a really low dose to build it in my system, but even the low dose, I was still feeling side effects of suicide, depression, anxiety.
I did notice that there was a lot of times that I thought, you know, that it would just be better to be dead than to keep living like that. And I look back on it now and I do realize that it was the meds.
Да, разумеется, в армии могут быть причины для самоубийства помимо психиатрических препаратов. Но было бы глупо игнорировать их влияние. Просто спросите у солдат на местах.
I was military police, actively working as a police officer on the military installation. And in 1 week, I went to about 8 or 9 suicide attempts where the person either overdosed or, you know, said that he was gonna kill himself, something like that. And 1 for 1, every single person was on psychiatric drugs.
Because of my role as a criminal investigator, I didn't witness the soldiers while they were taking psychiatric drugs. All I got to see was after the suicide or after the death, and then the reports come out. We'd get called pretty often to investigate. We would have an autopsy performed and would include a toxicological exam, which would determine any drugs in the system, and usually there was some type of drug. A lot of them were taking some sort of medication for depression or anxiety. There were a lot of suicides happening in the military, overseas in theater and back in the States.
С 2009 по 2012 год в США число самоубийств военных превзошло потери от аварий, сердечных заболеваний, рака и убийств. Министр обороны США назвал это эпидемией. Так что да, это проблема. Некоторые говорят, что это из-за стресса войны, но 85% самоубийц в армии не участвовали в боях, а 52% вообще не выезжали в районы боевых действий. В то же время компетентность военных психиатров даже не ставится под вопрос. И это приводит к попыткам суицида, подобным этой.
My son joined the army. He wanted to make a career and become something. He was still sweet and more normal when he came back from Iraq, even though he had, nervousness in crowds and PTSD. He was not different in personality as far as, to that degree like what we saw later on the drugs.
And so when Michael said, hey, I'm having anxiety issues, I said, you need to go tell them. Well, and that's what really began his journey. That was the worst step, in my opinion, that we could have ever done. It started off with 1 drug and went to 2. With each successive symptom that he got a new drug.
And we noticed that he started to go down in personality. It wasn't our son anymore. It was, anger, slurred speech.
It was surreal because the person I was talking to wasn't even my son. He was unsure of himself. He didn't have any will to do anything. At one point, he had stopped brushing his teeth, drinking water, eating, because he didn't care. He didn't even know that he was that way.
And I researched and discovered that our soldiers were being medicated and that they were committing suicide from it. So I printed all my research out and I handed it to my husband. And I said to my husband, tell me what you think of all this research. And he came back to me and said, if my calculations are correct, there's a pattern here that matches our son's behavior. And if my calculations are correct, he's just about ready to commit suicide. I was in the dollar store and he called me and said, I don't want to upset you, but I want you to know Michael's okay, but he tried to kill himself. And he put 2 IVs in his arms and he bled out in the bathtub and he was drawing in his blood on the walls. He didn't even know he was committing suicide.
So his cognizance, his reason, was already usurped by these pills. They take away who you are. And he wasn't the same.
We had the hospital check him and they found at least 9 drugs in his system. And they're just the ones they tested for.
They were giving my son drugs that had black box warnings, said, if you're under 25 and you're taking this pill, your risk of suicide is going up 50%. Risk of suicide. But they were still giving him the pills.
What he went through was so horrific it's hard for him to talk about. But he allows us to speak because he wants to save his comrades. He wants to save others who are going through the same thing, who are being drugged with lethal cocktails.
Me speaking as Michael, knowing the things that he has said to others, he would say, stay away from the pills. It's a dead end.
В психиатрии утверждается, что препараты спасают жизни, но там редко обсуждается риск суицида. А почему? Потому что эти предупреждения для 18-24-летних, а это возраст где-то половина американских солдат в действующей армии. И все же, использование препаратов военными США выросло на 76% с 2001 года. Сюда входят антидепрессанты, которые психиатры выдают солдатам для предотвращения самоубийств.
There's no evidence that drugging stops suicide. The reason I'm saying this is because it is alleged that if somebody is suicidal, you should medicate them. Except there's no evidence that medicating somebody who's suicidal is going to prevent suicide. There's substantial evidence that many drugs actually promote suicide.
And last year, within the DoD, there were 349 suicides among military personnel. That's almost one a day, literally one a day.
Это больше самоубийств, чем потерь в боях. И командование очень озабочено.
In fact, in 2009, Fort Campbell, Kentucky was actually closed down by the base commander for a time because they were having just an inordinate number of suicides.
Suicides on Fort Campbell have to stop now.
The last I heard, the VA was getting close to 450 calls a day to their suicide hotline, which they set up years ago to handle the amount of veterans that have suicidal thoughts on a daily basis. 450 calls a day.
Эта проблема эхом отозвалась в коридорах власти.
One of the biggest concerns I have about the military is the inordinate number of suicides that have taken place among active duty and those who've left the military.
3 years ago, I got Congress to hold hearings to examine the relationship between suicide and increased use of medications, and there was a direct parallel. The amount of suicides were increasing proportionate to the amount of medications being introduced.
So, do antidepressants cause suicide? Of course they do.
So, don't blame the soldiers. Don't blame the military as a whole. Blame the corruption of the military by the psychiatric industry that is peddling false, dangerous medicine, that is peddling a kind of modern-day quackery, calling it treatment, but delivering suicide.
И если таковы дела в войсках, то у ветеранов все еще хуже. Они убивают себя в количестве 22 в день, один каждые 65 минут. Но думала ли психиатрия прекратить раздачу препаратов? Нет. Вместо этого наступление на всех фронтах.
I was a very highly functioning non-commissioned officer. I was a platoon sergeant at the time. I was kind of always being groomed for that next rank. I was getting sent to the right schools, had the support of my chain of command. Things were going really good. After I witnessed this traumatic event on my last deployment in Iraq, that's when the medications really started coming. I mean, full force. And like I said before, before I knew it, I was on 9 to 12 different kind of medications. And when I was going through the separation process in the Army, I had to get some physicals and evaluations from outside people. These professionals would see my records come up on the screen and the amount of medications that I was put on throughout my time in the Army, but especially the last couple of years, and they would literally gasp. And they were shocked at the amount of drugs, the high doses of these drugs. It was like a 6-page rap sheet.
Зная, что психиатрические препараты влияют на ваше тело, как психиатрия борется с их побочными эффектами? Препарат давать не прекращают. Либо поднимают дозу, что усиливает побочные эффекты, либо добавляют другой препарат с другим эффектом. Затем еще один и еще один.
It was clear right away that they really had no idea what anything that they were giving me was really going to do. They said, this drug may not work. You may need a different one. This one may need a higher dose. This one may need a lower dose.
There was friends of mine that I saw had 2, 3, 4 pills that they had to take daily.
You find soldiers that are on dozens of medications. And when I say, 7 to 9 drugs at one point, I'd say that was very average. I've heard as high as 14.
I know of some troops, personally, who were given up to 20 different drugs.
It's kind of depressing if you look at the number of medications that I've been on. It's very thick. It makes up a large portion of my medical file with the Veterans Administration.
And a lot of people were on not only psychiatric drugs, but drugs for their injuries. And the combination made them different. They weren't the same people.
They're mixing amphetamines with painkillers and antidepressants and sleeping pills. I mean, even to the unlearned, that sounds insane.
Это настолько распространено, что даже получило название политерапия. Но мало кто знает, что многие из этих препаратов не проходили проверок в таких сочетаниях. Это делает людей, принимающих их, чем-то вроде подопытных кроликов.
The danger escalates with every increase in dose and every increase in the number of medications.
I have watched my clients who have been prescribed psychotropic drugs, sometimes a cocktail, often a cocktail, sometimes a single drug, and they are grievously changed.
If they were experiencing an adverse effect, how would they know which drug it was? Was it the antipsychotic? Who knows? Was it the antidepressant? Was it a combination? These guys don't know. All they know is they're supposed to take these because their doctor said they'll be better. And in fact, they only got worse.
And the problem is that there's no attention to the detail of what happens to these troops that are placed on them. There's no follow-up. They're simply placed on them, given a great big huge supply of them, and they're sent out to fight.
Некоторым американским солдатам регулярно выдают 180-дневный запас препаратов, когда они едут на фронт. Без наблюдения, без ограничений. Принимай, когда захочешь.
And what happens to it when they go into combat? Are they sharing with their friends? Sure they are. That's why I've been told by social workers, corpsmen, medics, that 90% of the troops in combat have at one time or other taken some type of psychiatric medication.
It's just a grand, crazy, insane pharmaceutical roulette that's being conducted at the expense of our nation's sons and daughters, really.
My husband never did drugs, nothing, never did anything. And I dated him 5 years before I married him. And he never did anything like that. And then when he was in Afghanistan, the psychiatrist over there started giving him the medications for depression and, of course, the pain that he was in because he had been hit. And the first time he got hit, they just started drugging him up. And the second time he was hit is when they sent him home to me. And 2 weeks after him being home, the violence was so incredible. I told him that we needed counseling or we just needed to get a divorce because I couldn't live in the abuse that I had just gone through because my husband never treated me that way. Needless to say, at that point, I didn't realize that these drugs were affecting him. At one point in time, my husband was on 21 drugs, 21 at one time. I mean, and it was craziness. This is not, I don't even know who this person is that I lived with. I've tried to get him help right from the beginning with the drugs, and they're refusing him any help. They just keep continuing to give him the drugs, and he's not getting any treatment. His physical needs are not being met, and he's continuing to deteriorate on a daily basis. The whites of his eyes are now yellow. They have a yellow tint to them. His skin color is green and gray, and this happens often. And we do have the fear that we will wake up in the morning and he's going to die. Every day we live that every day. His daughter lives that every day. I live that every day. Is today the day that he's going to die? Is today the day I'm going to get the call? They need to give me my husband's life back, is what they need to do. They need to take him off the drugs so that he can think. He can't think. He doesn't know.
Жуткая правда в том, что прекратить принимать эти препараты – это сущий ад. Привыкание может произойти всего за 2 недели.
Now we have soldiers coming back from the battlefield and they're addicted to psychotropic medications, and they have a detox reaction back in civilian life, and they begin to exhibit the side effects for which they were being pre-medicated. So they become depressed, they become suicidal.
Not only is it dangerous to be on these drugs, it's also very dangerous to come off of them. In fact, in many cases, the suicides happen immediately after someone stops taking an antidepressant drug. So if you do that, make sure you do it in a way where you have medical supervision and you have a support system in place so you can get off of those drugs safely.
Пытаться сделать это самому, в особенности одним махом, очень опасно, из-за ужасных последствий, которые вы можете испытать. Психиатр скажет, что вернулось умственное заболевание и что вам нужно возобновить прием препарата. Это неправда. Это ломка, как от любых уличных наркотиков.
The doctor did not tell me if I did come straight off of these that there would be a worse effect. I didn't know that. So when I did come off it, I fell harder.
These are actually addictive drugs, you know, and I didn't know how to act without them.
The withdrawal process is rough. And one of the things that I experienced is all these emotions, all these feelings, all these trauma, all this sadness that wasn't being dealt with, wasn't being cared for. It was just being medicated. When I got off all those drugs, it was like a floodgate.
Even though you come off those pills, there's a period of time for, I think, a long, long time that stuff is coming out of your system. You know, and sometimes you think that life would be better if you were dead.
Шокирует то, сколько солдат возвращается подсевшими на психиатрические препараты. Расследование в армии США показало, что почти у 35% пациентов армейских лечебных диспансеров есть проблемы, возникшие из-за препаратов по рецепту. И зачастую привыкание не временного характера, а на всю жизнь. Но дела могут обстоять еще хуже. Эти препараты могут привести к неожиданной смерти, быстрой и без предупреждения.
Gunnery Sergeant Chris Bacchus survived the assault on Baghdad, a deployment to Afghanistan, and a second tour in Iraq.
What specifically killed your brother?
He died because he mixed narcotic drugs. Whenever he had an issue with them, they would increase either the dosage or the potency of the individual pill.
A bomb couldn't kill this Marine, but a bottle did.
В крови Криса Бахуса были обнаружены 2 антидепрессанта, 2 опиоида и транквилизатор Ативан. Целых 27 рецептов на разные препараты было найдено на месте смерти, большей частью недавние. Вскрытие показало, что именно взаимодействие лекарств убило его. Любой опытный врач мог бы это предсказать. Случай Криса Бахуса ничем не отличается от сотни таких же. Всего в 700 километрах Стэн и Ширли Уайт праздновали возвращение сына, 23-летнего капрала морской пехоты Эндрю Уайта, из зоны боевых действий. Они понятия не имели, что произойдет, когда он поехал за помощью в госпиталь ветеранов, где ему поставили диагноз и напичкали препаратами.
Andrew's behavior really started to deteriorate. We saw more and more withdrawal. We saw anger issues. At one point, he slept for 2 or 3 days at a time.
The psychiatrist, their solution to his deteriorating condition was to increase his medications or to change the medications.
12 февраля 2008 года капрал Уайт умер во сне. Даже не пошевелился, просто умер.
The coroner's report said it was an intoxication of these drugs. Did not mention, but his heart stopped beating.
Andrew being 23, being very healthy, not having any major issues, you shouldn't die in bed.
Он был одним из 4 ветеранов в Западной Вирджинии, которым еще не было 30, умершим таким же образом за несколько месяцев. Только очень тщательное расследование невролога из Сан-Диего установило причину.
I tried to understand how they could have died, what the mode, the mechanism of death could have been. And these dead in an undisturbed bed were cardiac. Suddenly the heart stops for some reason.
Прослеживая каждую ниточку, он обнаружил, что у каждого был тот же диагноз, и каждый принимал тот же набор сильных психотропных препаратов.
Came across literature on the antipsychotics, and they said that the antipsychotics have a particular danger. They can stop the heart suddenly. And here these veterans, all 3 were on a combination of drugs which can cause or lead to sudden cardiac death. Might this not be the tip of an iceberg? Might there be others? And to make a long story short, that list grew to 250, 300, and today it is 351 probable cardiac deaths. The risk of sudden cardiac death makes those drugs truly unfit for human consumption, and yet they're being used like jelly beans in the military.
Yeah, we're watching me here, Devil Dog.
Еще одним таким случаем была смерть 21-летнего капрала Чада Алекшлагера.
Are you kidding that? It's machine gun fire. We don't know where it's coming from. But no worries. We have our sandbag structures. Carry on.
Chad was hilarious. You know, super smart. Super smart.
He was a lot of fun. Yeah, he played sports. Yeah, all of that. Like any normal kid was, outdoors all the time.
He was willing to make friends and talk to everybody. So that's kind of, you know, what caught my eye in the beginning as well. So he was just fun to be around.
This Native American has no comment.
Well, he told me the reason why he wanted to join the military was that if he went, then maybe his children wouldn't have to go.
He really felt like it was his duty as a citizen to participate.
When he came back, we realized he was different. He had asked his commander that, you know, he wanted to seek counseling. He needed some help because he was having problems dealing with what he had done over there and what he saw on that first tour.
All right, the reason I'm down here and not up there is because as soon as the IED went off, we were talking about a possible trigger man. We don't know where they are because we never know where they are.
Just all kind of saw like, okay, they're gonna give you some medication. You're gonna, you know, see a psychiatrist for a little bit, talk it out, things will get better. We were so naive.
When he was on the drugs, he seemed like he was just doped up, all the time. He was disoriented.
It literally turned him into a walking zombie. I mean, after he would take that, and you know, and he was real adamant about making sure he took his medication on time.
It just felt like the medication made him forget what he was doing, made him forget things, some things that had happened in the past. We'd be talking about stories and he wouldn't believe what I was telling him.
And he'd take Seroquel and then 10 minutes later be going back to his pill bottle and say, well, I gotta take my medication. And it's like, you just took it.
He wasn't in control, I felt like, in the end. He just really didn't know what he was doing. He wasn't going to work when he was supposed to. He said he would just sleep in his room.
We're gonna pause for a second due to malfunctions and technical difficulties.
I got the knock on the door at 11 o'clock at night. But when I heard the knock on the door, I knew what it was.
They had found Chad. And my thought was, okay, great, where is he? Where's his little shit? You know, I hadn't heard from him. And he said that he was at the barracks. I said, okay, is something wrong? Can I go see him? And he said that they found him in his room, that he was dead on the floor. They didn't know how long he'd been there, that he was already gone, and I couldn't see him. I couldn't even get on base. All I could think of was that he was alone in that room by himself, that he was supposed to be safe.
It was harder for us because we always expected, if he's in the military, he's in the Marines, we kind of expected that if he were to die, he was going to die when he was out on deployment. You know, he was going to die, you know, killed in action, something. We didn't expect him to come home and die.
I had a doctor at Texas A&M University read the autopsy and then said that the levels of the meds in there were not excessive. They were in line with what was prescribed.
Nothing was out of range of dosage, but they looked at it and they said, how come he's taking, 7 of them? It's a lot. And the doctor looked right at me and said, they killed him.
I blame the psychiatrists and I blame the doctors for prescribing those pills. Those are the ones that never checked up on him and let him walk out with all the other pills. Didn't take any of the pills away, just kept giving him more pills. And they're the ones.
Good morning and hoorah.
В психиатрии эти смерти называют случайными передозировками, но на самом деле это граничит с убийством по небрежности. И в то время как солдаты погибают от смертельной смеси этих препаратов по рецепту, возникает вопрос, пытаются ли психиатры найти этому причину? То, что солдаты умирают, ужасно, но ведь последствия идут куда дальше. Это может затронуть жизни тех, кого они любят больше всего.
I was with the 101st Airborne Division. I was assigned to them doing gun truck and convoy security, Operation Iraqi Freedom. Came out as a captain. I've got a total of 26 months in combat. When I came out, returned home from Operation Iraqi Freedom, anyone that marked that they had seen combat or had seen someone killed or had participated in combat operations directly, it was mandatory that you went to mental health. I myself was prescribed Prozac, Depakote, and at one time Zoloft. One night, and I'll never forget this as long as I live. One night I had laid down and I'd taken my pills, and I took a shot of Jack Daniels. At that time I had my children staying with me, so I didn't get drunk or anything like that, didn't drink overly heavy, and for some reason I decided to sleep on the couch this time. And I can remember opening my eyes and not being able to move my arms and my legs and literally feeling like I was choking to death. And my son, who was 13 at the time, He came in, obviously I was making some noises, and he shook me so hard that I fell off of the couch. And that kind of woke me up. But literally I felt like I was dying. And I can't help to think if my son wasn't there to wake me up, would I have been a statistic? Maybe.
Будь то военный или ветеран, солдат под воздействием препаратов плохо влияет на других членов семьи.
What we're seeing is that now this label of being broken and disordered is not only being utilized with our troops, but it's now also extended with their families.
You hear stories about these young children that are living with a deployed mommy or a daddy who just can't handle the deployments. So what happens is these troops that were deployed come home, whether or not they saw combat doesn't matter. They're still being forced to take a subjective questionnaire, psychiatric questionnaire, and based off of the results are getting told to do these drugs. And when they take the drugs, they become somebody that's different than what that child remembered them to be. Now that child has to deal with coping in a way that is very different than what they had to deal with when the parent was initially home. That child can't handle it. So what happens? Mom and dad says the child needs to go see somebody for help. The child goes seeks help. The child gets the same drugs that mommy and daddy's on.
Instead of dealing with the problem the right way, it's a lot easier to give a kid a pill, which ultimately destroys that young mind and ultimately erases somebody from society when that child commits suicide.
My youngest son, Daniel, was a very funny, a little prankster with lots of friends in the neighborhood. He was loved by his teachers at school.
We would go out fishing or hunting or just playing around out in the woods. So were able to spend quite a bit of time together whenever I wasn't gone on training or deployment for the Army.
Daniel began having trouble sleeping very shortly after he left, and he was worried that his dad wouldn't come home. He was worried that his dad was going to get killed. And we saw the psychiatrist for 10 or 15 minutes, and he prescribed something to help him sleep, and also Celexa.
Well, when she started telling me about the medications, I was very concerned. Overall, it seemed to me that, you know, the situation was continuing to progress and he was just getting worse.
My husband came home from Iraq 3 months early because of my concerns.
I was very concerned at the personality change to becoming much more withdrawn and sad and depressed.
He was having some bizarre behavior. He began cutting himself at school, and he began having hallucinations.
Well, he never had any of those behaviors before being put on the drugs.
We were all here at the house. He was out of our sight for 10 or 15 minutes, and he had snuck in and went and he'd gone into his room, and I sent James to go find Daniel to help me in the yard. And he did.
911, what is your emergency?
We need an ambulance.
What's going on?
My little brother hung himself.
Okay, what's his name?
Daniel Raidens. My mom is performing CPR right now.
Okay, let me transfer you. Don't.
He was an innocent little boy who was just worried about his dad, who prayed every night that his dad would be safe, and that his dad would come home, and that angels would protect him. But there wasn't anybody to protect my son. Psychiatry in the military took our youngest son from us and ruined our family.
Дети – это заманчивая мишень для психиатрии. Родители почти 2 миллионов детей военные, и половина из них в действующей армии. А когда ребенок беспокоится за папу или маму, он становится легкой добычей.
The numbers of children who have been put on drugs within the military TRICARE system is astounding. You know, it's just exploding. So it has an effect, a ripple effect on the entire family unit.
Now, today, we're finding out outpatient psychiatric treatment for children of deployed active duty service members has reached an all-time high at 2 million visits. How many drugs are these children being forced to take now?
Сколько бы ни было, это слишком много. Согласно исследованию журнала Американской академии детской и подростковой психиатрии, 91% детей, посетивших психиатра, садится на психотропные препараты. Этого ли мы хотим для наших детей? Поражает то, что психиатрия, несмотря на провал, продолжает вредить людям, сажая их на препараты, плодя зависимость, жестокость и самоубийство. И все из-за самых низменных интересов. Психиатрия утверждает, что заболевания типа ПТСР неизлечимы. Она утверждает, что их надо контролировать препаратами всю оставшуюся жизнь. Это плохое лечение, но полезно для банковских счетов.
Once you label somebody and you start medicating them, over the life of that person, it's going to cost the government about $1.5 million to provide these medications and treatment.
There's a lot of money to be made here. There's a lot of money to be made by the companies that are producing these drugs.
Profit is the only conceivable motive for all of these psychiatric drugs in the military.
Taxpayers are footing the bill for this travesty of medicine. These psychiatric drugs that promote suicides, you're paying for them.
Так почему же психиатрия прописывает препараты в таком количестве? Потому что посадить кого-то на препарат гораздо легче, чем помочь ему. Благодаря такому росту психотропной наркотизации, психиатрия наладила тесные связи с фармацевтическими компаниями. Они сами расскажут вам об этом. К сожалению, куда бы вы ни посмотрели, везде присутствует конфликт интересов. Пример. Мэтью Фридман, психиатр и исполнительный директор Центра ПТСР в администрации ветеранов. Фридман не только получает деньги, выступая от лица 3 фармкомпаний, но и является членом научного рекомендательного совета компаний, производящих Paxil и Zoloft. И что вы думаете? Оказывается, это единственные препараты, одобренные правительством США для лечения ПТСР. Затем идет доктор Элспет Камерон Ричи, до недавних пор главный психиатр армии США. Она расхваливала антипсихотик Сироквель как весьма успешно лечащий беспокойство и кошмары на почве войны. Сироквель не только не одобрен для этих целей, но и связан с внезапным отказом работы сердца. Солдаты называют его «гробит-вель». На улице это детский героин. В том же году Ричи выступала в интернет-передаче, частично оплаченной производителем Сироквеля, продолжая нажимать на использование психотропов в армии.
Of course, I'm a psychiatrist, so I tend to think of psychiatric medications, and we treat soldiers with medications, with cognitive behavioral therapy, and other sophisticated treatments on the battlefield.
Наконец, вот психиатр и бывший бригадный генерал Стивен Ксенакис. Будучи в армии, он настаивал на частой психиатрической проверке солдат. Чем чаще, тем лучше. Сегодняшняя армия проводит такую проверку 5 раз, включая обязательный психиатрический опрос перед возвращением с места службы и повторный опрос через 6 месяцев. Все эти проверки изобилуют конфликтами интересов. Опросник, используемый при этих проверках, был рекомендован главным врачом армии и спонсирован Pfizer'ом, производителем антидепрессанта Zoloft'а. Другая проверочная программа для военнослужащих и их семей проводится группой, получившей миллионы долларов от 8 фармацевтических компаний. Но Ксенакису хочется быть в доле. Он собирается заработать миллионы, как директор компании, продающей сканер мозга, который планируется использовать для диагностики ПТСР. По сути, психиатрия заинтересована лишь в деньгах. И уж, конечно, не в помощи. И не пытаясь исправить эту неэффективную и неадекватную систему, отдел по делам ветеранов США недавно нанял 1600 психиатрических работников, чтобы справиться с проблемами, созданными самой профессией.
If all we're doing when we get more mental health professionals is more of the same thing, but then it's a fool's errand.
А для солдата, пошедшего в армию из чувства долга и служившего с честью, это сводится к одному – к предательству.
One of the things I have the benefit of really is getting thousands of emails a week, whether it's from veterans or other people suffering from pharmaceutical damage. It's specifically veterans these days. We see an increase. We see people calling out and saying they feel betrayed.
They are very proud to serve, fight for their countries, protect, you know, the people back home, their loved ones. And I think all they ask for is to come home and be treated fairly, given answers and looked after. And they're not looked after, they're told, it's all in your head, it's mental, take the tablets, it'll cure, go away, and that's it. And I think that is betrayal. For a word to use for those people is an understatement.
It's the deepest betrayal of a human being to kill them while claiming you're treating them, to call it medicine and deliver death.
И это все настолько не нужно, потому что надежда есть. И это не связано с психиатрическим лечением. Оглядитесь, и, к сожалению, вы повсюду увидите влияние психиатрии. Но существуют безопасные и эффективные решения, и их можно отыскать.
The main word for soldiers, and not only soldiers, but anybody suffering from any type of so-called mental illness, is that there's hope. That there's hope out there, there's solutions out there, things are available for you to get your life back, to not have suicidal thoughts, to not end your life, and it does not include psychiatric drugs.
There is a way to solve this. It's to get rid of the drugs and start treating soldiers like human beings, not lab rats. That's the solution.
The vets who get over their war wounds do it on their own, do it with friends, do it with colleagues, do it in support groups. They're doing it separate and distinct from the medical interventions.
If you talk to lads, when they get together, they help one another, they support one another. They are aware of fellow feeling, fellow understanding. Psychiatrists, by having the opportunity to disrupt that process by using drugs, can often disrupt it rather than support it.
A soldier does need help. He needs care and love and friendship and, you know, whatever else is going to make him feel better personally, but he does not need psychotropic drugs.
Настоящая медицинская помощь начинается с тщательного обследования компетентным врачом с целью выявить болезнь или нарушение, которое может быть причиной эмоционального расстройства.
Every symptom should be investigated for physical origins, because if you don't do that, almost certainly someone who has a real physical symptom is being labeled as having a psychiatric symptom, which is false.
By making sure that we clear up any physical issues, we begin to make the soldier, the veteran, feel better. Once they begin to feel better, they feel better physically, they feel better emotionally, and they're able to deal with some of the issues relative to the traumas or the stress that they were under while in combat.
Если вы хотите прекратить прием психиатрических препаратов, делайте это под наблюдением опытного врача.
Getting off the drugs is one of the best things that I've done, and because it's helped me out. It helped me be back being Mike Mezin, you know, and it really saved my life.
It's transformed my life, but at the same time, it's also made me look real hard at the damage that those drugs were doing me while I was on.
And it was
that type of incident that catalyzed my resolve to aborting the system that I was in and moving forward with a non-pharmaceutical approach, which has been phenomenally successful for me. I'm not the same person.
Но много солдат все еще находится под угрозой приказа принимать психотропные препараты. Именно поэтому очень важно знать свои права.
There is an obligation for the service to take care of our sons and daughters that are sacrificing themselves and giving an oath to defend the Constitution with their life. I mean, that's a big deal. The command may say you have to go to see a psychiatrist because we believe you to be unstable. So does he have to show up for the appointment? The answer is yes. However, once you go into that therapist's office, you are not required to participate in that treatment. So on occasion, I have people that call me and ask me, can I refuse this or can I refuse that? And I say, absolutely.
Основой для такого отказа служит одно из самых важных прав – информированное согласие. Информированное согласие – это право быть информированным о риске и преимуществах предложенного психиатрического лечения, альтернативных методах и возможности не прибегать к лечению вообще.
Do active duty and military have a right to informed consent? Absolutely. But these soldiers, sailors, Marines are not informed as to all of the consequences of these medications, because if you were truly informed as to the consequences of taking these drugs, would you really take them? And the answer is most likely no.
Информированное согласие – это одно из многих прав Военного кодекса Соединённых Штатов. Эти права есть и во многих других странах, но вы сами должны требовать их выполнения. Начните действовать, расскажите другим об этих правах. Многие уцелевшие после психиатрического лечения и их семьи смело выступают сейчас против него, и вы можете им помочь.
I don't want another family to experience what we've experienced. Unfortunately, that's happening.
This is an outrage. What's going on here? Are these young people just guinea pigs? Apparently so. My daughter was a guinea pig, and she's gone.
One of Tony's last things, he always told me, just keep speaking up, Mom. Even if you only help one person, just keep speaking up.
My goal is not just to tell Anthony's story, but I feel it's a story that's not unique. It's something that's happening to so many of our troops.
As an advocate for my son and an advocate for wounded veterans across the country, our group that I work with, we're trying to make a change in that direction.
So we made it our mission that we're gonna tell everybody we can and have the website have as much information that we can.
We've got to get the word out to our soldiers. Don't take these drugs. Don't take these drugs. It's the beginning of the end.
Необходимы неотложные меры, и не только в США, но и по всему миру. В 2012 году в Англии больше солдат и ветеранов покончило с жизнью, чем погибло в бою. То же самое в относительно маленькой австралийской армии за прошедшие 10 лет. 20% всех смертей в германской армии за границей – самоубийства. В российской армии количество самоубийств на 65% больше, чем во всей стране.
So, what is the solution? Get rid of psychiatry and mental health. Don't leave them in charge.
Mental health will not improve until psychiatrists are no longer in charge of it.
I truly believe that they are destroying our military.
The battlefield is safer than psychiatry. Do you understand that? Statistically, you are less likely to be shot by an enemy than to be killed by a pharmaceutical drug. That's the truth about psychiatry.
И все же влияние психиатрии идет сегодня гораздо дальше армии. Именно так, как планировал Джон Рис. Психиатрическое лечение опробовано и внедрено в армии и распространяется во все уголки гражданского общества. Психиатрия – это международная индустрия с доходом в $330 миллиардов в год. Она обещает помощь, она несет боль, травмы и смерть. Незримый враг теперь на виду. Что будет дальше, зависит от нас. Это факты. Дело за вами.